with you guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I will be sharing with you guys my August 2022 wrap-up. So August was a super productive month. I think I have somehow got myself back in the swing of reading a ton. I feel like that the reading schedules I've set up the last couple of months have been amazing. I don't know what it is recently. I just feel like I am back on the reading horse and I feel so good about it. And I think too, a big part of it has been that I have, in the last couple of months gone through and curated my entire book collection to the point where, I feel a lot better about the books I have, and I'm excited about the things that are coming up and things that I'm working on. And I have all these other projects going on too that it makes me more excited to continue with working through stuff and reading, which is probably the best I've felt in my reading journey in quite some time. So let's get into the stats for August, since there are a ton of books to go through this month. So this month I have completed 13 books and did have one DNF, so I did go through about 14 books this month, which is super impressive. I think that I didn't quite meet my goal last month. I feel like I read more in July than I did this month, but either way, I still read a lot of really good books. Almost everything was a 4 and a 5 star, which is really good. I feel like I'm really finding things that I'm enjoying more so than not. I feel like this past month as well was the month where I had the most books that I immediately upon finishing wanted to reread, which has not really happened in a very long time. I have at least 3 books in this month that are ones that as soon as I got done with them, I said, I need to go back and read this again. And I'm very excited for that, because one of which was a library copy that I wasn't even sure that I was going to enjoy, and I ended up loving it, and now I need to get a physical copy as soon as I possibly can. In terms of stats this month, I did read a total of 4,327 pages, both in physical and ebook format, and had no minutes worth of audiobooks. I had 9 books that I read this month that were physical. I had 5 ebooks and no audiobooks, and 13 of the books I read this month were from my personal library, and only 1 was borrowed that I completed at least in this month. In terms of star ratings, I did have 7 books that were 5 stars, 5 books that were 4 stars, and 1 3-star book, and I did, like I said, have 1 DNF over the course of this month. The very first thing I completed this month was my shortest read, I think, this entire month, which was the Critical Role Vox Machina Origins 3 Issue 1 comic book. This is like a 20-page comic book. It was super quick to fly through. For Aurelium, it was counting for the Animal Studies course I needed to complete. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. Loved it. Everything to do with the Critical Role world, I'm basically going to give an automatic 5 stars, especially when it comes to like backstories, because the characters for Vox Machina in particular, I love very dearly. And these origin stories are mostly kind of just telling the story of things that happened in the campaign before Critical Role basically became the live stream show that it did become in like 2015. So all of these are basically already established things that happened in the campaign, just now kind of adapted so that people could see some of these things that happened leading up to what we know of the Vox Machina campaign. And so it's always going to be a fun time. The banter is always right there. Like, this is one of those graphic novels and comic book series that it is very clear that, the people involved in Critical Role had a hand in making this, because it sounds exactly as the characters I know and love to sound like in that story. The next book I completed was another 5-star read, and that was Black Girls Must Die Exhausted by Jane Allen. This was also one of my Wheel of D20 picks for the month, which was to read a book under 500 pages as part of the TBR game I had to play within my game of Stephanie's Book versus Starhop TBR game. And this also for Aurelium counted for my astronomy class, and this also then counted for Witchathon for 3 prompts, which were earthy, flowers, and powerful read for the bingo board. I did love this a lot, but you can hear all my thoughts on this one in my Wheel of D20 vlog, as that has a more in-depth review of it. But upon finishing this, I did really want to go back and reread it, and I really would like to get the second book in this series that did come out earlier this year. This was just a really profound and very hard-hitting story that I didn't expect to really fall in love with, and I really did, and I I need more people to read this because I think this is really something a lot of people will enjoy. Now, my next book was the DNF I had this month. And it is for a reading project I've been talking about doing for a while. And this is going to be going out before the vlog for that comes out. And so I think a lot of people are going to be kind of surprised with the ultimate result of that vlog, which I think by the time this video goes out will be next Friday's video. But that was From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. Yes, I did DNF this. Yes, the first episode in my Finisher DNF series was a DNF with the first book. And I'm not apologizing for it at all. Because I remember early in the month when I was reading this, telling everybody about how I felt very icky from the very first couple of chapters. And while I did like the mystery that was kind of surrounding around this, I really could not move past that so much to the point where I, about 100 pages in, had just decided that I was done with it. And I was getting bored by like that 100-page mark. I do not care to read the rest of this nor the rest of the series. I tried it. I gave it 10% of the way through, which is always my go-to when it comes to books I don't know if I'm going to enjoy, is that I go through about 10% of it, and then at that point, if I'm not enjoying it, it goes away. Next book, though, was a much better read, and that was A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J. Maas. This was one of the books I needed to read for the read-along that I've been participating in with Princess from Castle Library, and it also was counting for a couple of things with readathons and also for the Wheel of D20. So for the Wheel of D20, this was completing another prompt that I had got from Stephanie's Book versus Star Hot TBR game, which was to read a book under 400 pages. And then for Aurelium, this counted for my first level for Elemental Studies, and for Witchathon was counting for a few prompts, namely stars, a book club pick, an ebook, and a book with more than 300 pages for the bingo board. And I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I'm actually quite surprised with how much I really liked this, because I remember when this first came out, back when I was probably a couple of years into BookTube, how everybody was really disappointed with how this went. But in all honesty, having read the series pretty much almost back to back to back, like at least one book each month for the last handful of months, this was actually super interesting because I really liked that there were a lot of perspectives in it, and I really did like the way that this kind of had that very Christmas vibe going on with it. But I also have all my thoughts about this one in my Wheel of D20 vlog if you would like to hear more on it, but I'm kind of in the minority when it comes to this in terms of the thought of and the reception of this book, where I really enjoyed it compared to how most people seem to not like this one as much as the rest of the book. The next thing I ended up reading was Descender Volume 2 by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen. This is the second installment in a sci-fi graphic novel series. For Wheel of D20, this was counting for the graphic novel prompt, which was the final prompt I needed to complete from the set that I got from Stephanie's Book versus TBR game. That was basically it. So I did give this a 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked it, but I basically feel that when it comes to graphic novels, I have a kind of set way of whether or not something gets a 5-star or more typically gets a 4-star or 3-star. And typically the first volume has to really set up the world to where I'm interested. It has to have a very good opening. It has to feel like it's, really getting me involved in the story for it to be a 5-star. And then subsequent novels have to be basically keeping the story going and making me feel like I want to keep going with it and propelling me forward. And I will say that this one did do that. I just felt like it wasn't hitting the same as what Descender Volume 1 did. And I really did like it, but I feel like this was definitely kind of one of those middling books where it has to do a lot of the building of the world. It has to do a lot of the building of the story. And so it kind of gets bogged down a little bit in that, but was still very, very enjoyable. And then piggybacking right off of that, I then went into Descender Volume 3, which was actually completing another prompt for Aurelium. This one was completing the second level of my Elemental Studies class I needed to complete. And this one I gave a 5 out of 5 stars to, because this one in particular is essentially a graphic novel where we learn a lot of the backstories and the ways in which a bunch of the characters get to where they are by the time Descender Volume 2 comes around, and then basically going from there into Descender Volume 4. So this one I thought was super fun. I really liked learning all of the backstories within this. Some of the characters that I wanted to know more about, I got to know more about, and we also got to see things kind of in tandem with how the story was starting to go. Like, we would see their backstory, and then it would jump into, you know, where they were at currently in the actual storyline, so that we could have more context as to why, you know, things are happening as they're happening. And it was so much more fun, and I really think I'm going to enjoy the rest of this series. And I'm now halfway through Descender, and so I'm very excited to see how the last half goes, and then also how the sequel series Ascender will go, because that takes place, I think, so many years after this one. I want to say it's maybe 10 years, but I don't remember. But this one was definitely much more enjoyable than Volume 2, but Volume 2 was still really good. The next book was probably my most favorite book this entire month, and that is The Final Strife by Sarah El Arifi. This is a kind of young adult, bordering new adult fantasy. This was originally Brandy's, from Books with Brandy Shanae's book club pick for her members in July, and I missed out on it, and I had to basically play catch up a little bit, and I'm so glad I did, because this was so amazing. It was so much fun. It honestly was such an amazing start to a trilogy, and it's a debut novel, and I was blown away by the world building, the whole plot of two characters that were involved with this and how they intertwine with each other. There's so much that I want to go into that I feel like I can't, you know, say because I don't want to spoil anything, but please, 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 for the love of God, everybody go pick this up. It is so good. It is probably one of the best fantasies I've seen from YA in a very, very long time, and I'm so excited to see where this goes, because honestly, I'm the way this ended, I'm shocked, I'm disturbed, I want to know more, and needless to say, I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars, and this completed the final level I needed for my Elemental Studies course. Please, 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 please go pick this up. Next book I ended up reading was My Dearest, Darkest by Kayla Cottingham. This was the Royally Booked book club pick that is hosted by Princess at Castle Library, and I really like this a lot. This is a YA kind of paranormal horror-esque. It's not super scary, but it definitely was a lot creepier than I thought it was going to be, and it is a sapphic horror, which is really interesting. There is a female-female romance involved in this story that I thought was very sweet. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and I really did like it, but I did feel like that this kind of suffered from a lot of the YA stereotypical kind of insta-lovey almost kinds of tropes, and it was really creepy and atmospheric, but I wish it would have been turned up just a little bit more, because I think it would have been so, so good to see this turned up to an 11 as opposed to being kind of more at like an 8 for me. This one was counting for Aurelium for the first level of my restoration class that I needed to complete. Next book I read was the Brandon Sanderson book for this month, which is part of the Brandon Sanderson read-along that is being hosted by Brandy from Books with Brandy Shanae and Bree from Bree Cherie Reads. And this month we ended up reading Warbreaker. We still have to do the live show for this. It will be happening here in like the second weekend of September, I think. So there is still time to finish this if you haven't as of yet. But I loved this so much, and I think this is very easily my favorite Brandon Sanderson book we have read thus far. It is definitely understandable why a lot of people love this as like their favorite standalone. Although it is no longer going to be a standalone, there is going to be a second novel within this world. But still, this was, for the longest time, I had heard the best standalone book for Brandon Sanderson, and I totally get why. It's a world that's all based in color magic, and it's a real fun time. So I highly suggest those of you that are looking to get into Brandon Sanderson and the Cosmere to really look at this one, because I think this one, in particular, if you've also read Mistborn, may have some very interesting parallels that you can kind of pick out, because both Bree and I actually had started discussing the fact that there is very likely a connection to the world in Warbreaker and Mistborn based on a very particular element in the magic system. So I don't know if anybody else that's read it had caught that, but that was something that we kind of started to theorize a little bit because of the fact that something very similar in both worlds was happening. So very happy to have read this, and I did give it a 5 out of 5 stars. This was completing the final level I needed for my restoration class for Aurelium, and for Witchathon was taking up the most amount of prompts for the bingo board, namely a TBR vet, fantasy, a book with gods or goddesses, a book that's inspired by your star sign, and a standalone. The next book I read was a reread for me, and that was The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. This was completing for my Wheel of D20 prompt for a reread, and also completed the reread prompt for Witchathon on the bingo board. But this is the third time I've read it. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, absolutely loved it, and any of my thoughts that I have on it will be in my Wheel of D20 vlog. The next book was my final read I needed to read for the Wheel of D20, and that was As Old as Time by Liz Braswell. This is technically the third book in the Twisted Tales series, but they're all basically standalone, so you can pretty much read them in any order you want. For the Wheel of D20, this was to read a book with red on the cover, and this also completed my final prompt I needed to complete for my bingo board for Witchathon, which was to read a book with a shiny cover, because some of the text is kind of shiny, and also the cover is kind of that really cool glossy, like you can see the kind of glare it gets from the light. This was a 4 out of 5 stars for me. I really liked a lot of what went on with this, but again, my thoughts are in my Wheel of D20 vlog for this. I will say that I think that if you're a Disney fan, you definitely will get something out of this, but I don't think that people who are Disney fans are going to enjoy this really at all, because it's definitely meant, I think, for people who are Disney fans, and especially ones who want to have that kind of what if scenario played into with all of these books, because that's kind of the point of the Twisted Tales, is it kind of poses a question of what if something in this story was changed, and then it literally takes a life of its own. And so I think that if you're a Disney fan, you would definitely like that, to see kind of a new spin on these stories. But if you're not really into Disney, you're not going to really get much from it. Now, the next book was actually a huge surprise for me in terms of how much I loved this book and need a physical copy of this for my own collection, because I had borrowed Extasia by Claire Legrand from my library. This is Claire Legrand's newest book, came out in February of this year, and was one of my 2022 most anticipated reads for this year. And I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It was so freaking good. It gave me everything I was wanting in terms of a horror that I did not get with my Dearest, Darkest. And this had so many amazing twists and turns. There were things that were happening that would end so quickly that I didn't know what else there could be involved in the story. And then Claire just brings in this whole new thing that I didn't even think about in the first place that blew my mind. Like, I need my own copy of this like immediately, because I love this so much, and I love Claire's writing. If you're a fan at all of the Village movie, the M. Night Shyamalan movie, from chapter 1, this gives major Village vibes. It's a very similar kind of world setup, very puritanical in a sense, and how it's very isolated from the rest of the world. So if you're a fan of that movie, this would definitely be something that you would enjoy, I think, to an extent, because I don't know if you're gonna like the rest of the content or what there is, but at least the atmosphere and the vibes that you get from this book are massive Village vibes. Like, I said that the entire time I was reading this, that I think everybody that I was talking to about it was getting sick of me talking about it, but I loved this so much. This really, honestly, is tying for the final Strife for my most favorite, but they're my favorites for very different reasons, so I'm fine with them sharing the top spot, because they have both massive differences in terms of their stories that I love so much that I don't know whether or not I could really say one was better than the other. The next book I ended up reading was God of Mercy by Okezi Nooka. This was Brandy from Books with Brandy Shanae's membership book club pick for this month, and I did give this a 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked this a lot, but the problem I had with this in general was the writing style. I felt that the writing style was a little too out there for me. It wasn't necessarily flowery or lyrical, but it did feel like it was supposed to be ethereal in a sense, and a little bit more of a higher brow fantasy kind of vibe. But this story is not really fantasy. It's actually more contemporary with fantastical elements, because this takes place in a community that is very African inspired, where essentially you have a huge Christian influence coming in, and it's really changing a lot of things in this world. And you have our main character Ijima, who is a mute girl, and everyone thinks in her community that she was cursed by their god and the supreme being that they have, but then find out that she's able to fly. And so the medicine man there says that she very likely is not cursed, but touched by the Supreme Being, because he believes that, from what he can tell from communicating with the gods, is that there is some kind of impending god war that is being kind of intensified by the massive Christian influence that is coming in from other neighboring areas. And so this is a story that really focuses on this idea of kind of a religious colonizational issue that there has been for literal centuries. Like, any chance you can get in history looking at, you know, when people were moving from place to place, there is religious colonization involved. People try to convert others to, you know, believe in what they believe, taking over an entire space, especially when it comes to taking over indigenous places. That is a massive theme within all of this. And I think that from that perspective, this is a very beautiful story. I really like what the story was going for. But the writing style, I think at times made it a little bit more difficult for me personally to enjoy it. But that, again, does not take away from the actual content of the story or the representation. This style of writing is just not really for me in particular. And the final book I completed this month was The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. This is a middle grade story that basically is about a young girl who is adopted by a witch who everybody thinks steals the babies that are, you know, basically given up to her and kills them or something. But things are not exactly as it seems. And I'm going to leave it at that because this story was kind of all over the place personally. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, and this was the final book I needed to read for Aurelium. So I completed Wheel of D20, I completed Witchathon, and I completed Aurelium. This one was completing my shape-shifting class, which I only needed to have one book read for that. And I just don't feel like this really hit in the way that a lot of people, you know, have talked about it. It was definitely very whimsical and fun. I loved Furion. Furion is the sweetest little bean ever. I just adore him with all my heart and soul. But I don't feel like I really got a lot of the emotional impact that there was with this book. I feel that I just kind of was coasting through it, and it just didn't hit in the way I was expecting it to, especially for a middle grade, because middle grade tends to be the genre where that really hits home for me for a lot of reasons emotionally. And so I was kind of disappointed that this one did not do that, but was still a good read nonetheless, and I definitely do recommend it for those of you that are looking for a little bit of a whimsical, little, you know, short middle grade story. But with that being said, those are all the books I ended up reading in August. Let me know what you guys ended up reading down in the comments below. Did you read any of these? If you did, what did you think of them? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. But anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already and you'd like to be and would like to see more content like this, go ahead and hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!